Recording has started. So good evening to one and all. First of all, I am thankful to Professor Ashok Acharya. He has accepted our invitation that is informal, and that shows his academic interest. Today, he has agreed to speak on global justice and global south, and I have asked my colleague who has retired from our department, Dr. Suresh Chandra Patel, to introduce the theme of today's talk. And as the convener, let me introduce the speaker. I think I know CV of the speaker that is available on the Google. One can view it from there. So briefly, let me introduce the speaker. So Professor Acharya, he is the professor in the Department of Political Science of University of Delhi, and he has done his MA in Utkal University, MPhil in the University of Delhi, and PhD from University of Toronto. During 2012 and 13, he was the visiting professor in Yale University. His research interest lies with political theory, political thought, ethics and politics, Indian politics, etc. He has published many books, and most notable are Political Theory and Introduction, that is co-edited. He has co-edited it with Professor Rajiv Bhargav, and another notable book is Citizenship in a Globalizing World. He has n number of articles in many books and many journals. He has many conference presentation in his credit. And most importantly, he is the member of American Political Science Association. With this, brief introduction of today's speaker, now I welcome my colleague, Dr. Suresh Chandra Patel, to introduce the topic. Yes, Patel sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. Good evening to one and all. Esteemed Professor Ashok Acharya. I think one of the participants is Professor S.N. Mishra. All other participants who are present over here. Uh, Frankly speaking, this is an honor and this is a privilege to me given by Dr. Mishra and the Department of Political Science, Sambalpur University, to introduce the theme of the webinar, in which such an eminent person like Professor Ashok Acharya will be speaking. Frankly speaking, I don't have the audacity to introduce this topic, global justice and global south. I think Professor Acharya will be the right person in course of the deliberation. He will be introducing this topic in a grand way, and I think he will satisfy all the participants in course of time. But as entrusted by Dr. Mishra, I was thinking I will be speaking a few words regarding this topic, and I will try to not to introduce the topic, but I will just speak few words on the topic. I was just thinking that what could be the basic idea about this web. Different words. One is global justice and the other one is global south. These two concepts are there. As a common man, as a student of political science, I was trying to understand actually what is global justice. And as a common man, I could guess. I will request Professor Acharya to speak on the technical connotation, if any, of the concept of global justice, technically what it means or what it connotes. But as a common man, I was trying to understand that global justice means justice for the globe or justice for the world. I think this concept is not very popular in academic circle. It needs to be defined. Its contour needs to be redefined. We have to know what is the concept, what the concept is all about, what are the challenges in the way of global justice, how this could be possible, or what are the broad things that are to be debated and discussed in this concept. So I will be a listener in the course of time that Professor Acharya will be deliberating what exactly this concept global justice connotes technically. Then, of course, then the other part of the discussion, the global south, I was just trying to understand that when we speak of the global south or the global north, we can speak of on the one hand the developed countries of the world and the other hand the developing or the underdeveloped countries of the world. I understood that global south technically means the poorer countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America. These parts connotes the global south. So, in a concept of global justice, how to link the concept of global south, or how the both the concepts are to be linked, and how global south is going to facilitate the achievement of global justice, or it will be hinder, or it is preventing, or it is somehow creating some sort of differences in the achievement of global justice. That is for Professor Acharya to deliberate and discuss. I think in course of his presentation, he will try to highlight all these things, what exactly global justice is, what exactly global south, and how both the concepts will be linked. He is the right person to debate and discuss on this. With these few words, I once again congratulate and also express my sincere thanks to Dr. H.S. Mishra for giving me the opportunity to introduce the theme of the webinar. Little bit I just did. I will prefer to be a listener where Professor Acharya will be speaking, and it is an honor for me. With these few words, I request Dr. Mishra to carry on the rest of the proceedings. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Mishra.
Thank
Please.
you, Dr. Patel, for this, for this involvement. And before I invite Professor, Acharya to, deliver his talk, let me welcome to Professor Surya Narayan Mishra. Right now, he's in America, and he has joined, and that is something great for us, right? I think it's not morning for him right now. Also, the time. So thank you, Mishra sir. Now I welcome
Himanshu
Professor
Babu, because the change of time. Previously, when you begin at 6 o'clock, it was 4:30. Very difficult time for me, because the time has been reduced by 1 hour. So when you begin at 6 o'clock, it's 5:30 in the morning.
So you were
So
able to
I could
join
get
us.
up at 5 o'clock, because when I got the clip from you that Ashok will be speaking, so I think I should join. I thought yesterday night that I will get up at around 5 o'clock, but I had to give the alarm. So I got up at 5 o'clock. I am ready to participate. It's not previously I could not attend because the time was not facilitating
Conducive.
me to join, because it was 4:30 in the night, and I take drugs to sleep here, so I cannot get up so early. So though I am feeling sleepy, but 5:30 is okay for me to join. Thank you very much.
So thank you, sir. I think your
And
presence.
since I have a class, I'll leave in between. I have a class today with IIT students, so I leave after half an hour. But I may uh, um, come back if
Rejoin.
that class is an assignment class. I may come back towards the end part of it. But I thank Ashok for agreeing to this novel enterprise, I will say, not endeavor, enterprise of Himanshu. And I'm glad to see you, though from a distance of 12,000 miles. But welcome, welcome. And Happy New Year. I have not wished you Happy New Year because I am here since 5th of December. And I'll stay up to last week of May, hopefully. It may be extended. Okay, thank you.
So thank you, sir. I think your presence is always, meaningful to any kind of academic discussion. So now I welcome Professor Acharya to start his deliberation on this topic. Yes, sir. You can start.
Okay, thank you, Himanshu, for the invitation, and Dr. Suresh Patel, for introducing the theme. I'm much beholden to Himanshu for this invitation and to give me the opportunity to get to know some of these, students and research scholars in Sambalpur University and around, I would say. But I'm also very humbled and honored and privileged to have in the audience Professor Sujanaran Mishra, my former teacher and former colleague and a lifelong well-wisher. So I couldn't have had a better audience, which is, in whose, in the midst of whom, we have Professor Mishra. So that raises the stakes a little higher and the expectations a little higher, I guess. But I'm also absolutely certain that we should be able to connect with and introduce to the students, themes on which on some new themes that the students ought to know and that they need to discuss and read about. So that's one of the reasons why I chose to speak on global justice and the global South. And this is a wonderful initiative by Himanshu, and words fail to express my appreciation of this kind of an initiative, because nothing like this, the one that he's doing, exists in the whole of the state, I would say. So with these words, I'll give you, I think I can, it is 6:15, so I can go up to 7 max, right?
I think there is no time limitation. I think
I have a time limit, but anyway. So we will go up to 7, and then depending on the discussions, if there are some questions, we'll see how we can engage some of the other issues. Now, a little bit of that history as to why choose and why speak about global justice now. What is its relevance in today's world? Well, this was a thought that came to my mind around 10 years back, when I was, I had taken up the responsibility, as usual, of periodically revising the MS syllabi of the University of Delhi, and which is when I thought that, we keep talking about justice to our students, but why not include one component of justice as global justice, and see where the interest goes. And luckily for me, and for the students, we had a very rich interaction over the last couple of years. So we treated global justice a little differently than all other discussions we had on justice. Eventually, there was an opportunity to connect with and get to know Thomas Fogge at Yale University, with whom I interacted, and then I got an invitation on a fellowship to be at Yale, and we co-taught a course for the first time. Along with him, I co-taught a course at Yale on global justice and the South, which was which was imported back to India, to my university, and then we had a full-fledged course and an optional course on global justice and the South, which has excited and provoked many of my students to attend and to start thinking about some of these issues. So very fortunately, almost every year, I have had some almost around 200 students out of 500 students opting for this course on global justice. And initially, I thought that there are not many takers for a political theory course. So I was very pleasantly surprised to see how so many students wanted to connect with and wanted to study global justice a little deeper. Now, there are various themes within which we can discuss the whole idea of global justice. But I started off by asking, why do we think it is a very relevant topic today? and its relevance is only growing over a period of time. More and more people are getting to connect with the discourses surrounding global justice, and more people are getting to be interested in these issues. And whether we talk about climate change, whether you talk about international migration, whether we talk about global poverty, whether you talk about even global conflict, international law, the multilateral organizations like the United Nations, and global governance, or even global democracy, some aspect of these things are touched upon by some of the central themes and the framework of global justice. So one big challenge for us is to put these all together and make sense of that framework, that unifying framework that connects with all these different, seemingly divergent, but they all converge with some of the central ideas and concerns of global justice. So the relevance part. Now, for the last couple of decades, we have been talking about the whole, idea of globalization and its impact on global politics, on global inequalities, and so on. And we have come to terms that how globalization has, has gone ahead, creating huge and deep inequalities in the world today. At one point of time, even, there were many so-called liberals or right-wing scholars who would say, oh, but globalization is doing everything good for the developing world, for the global south. People are getting more opportunities, less people are dying out of hunger, and so on. So why is it bad? We should just celebrate the fact that we were going through that phase called globalization. Not entirely. Actually, some of these views were tested when some of more empirical data rolled out, and people started thinking and realizing that the deep inequalities have started emerging in some countries. And then, if you are looking at data, and if you're looking at global inequality data anywhere, one of the foremost persons who has worked on global inequality is Branko Milanovic. He's a Polish economist working at the World Bank. And if you look at all his writings, he has been writing on different shades of global inequality, bringing out one book after another. And, he has been scathing in his analysis of how global inequality is getting entrenched. But whether you read Branko Milanovic or you read any other author, the one thing that is very clear, and that is when we are comparing the inequality gap, and we are looking at the inequality gap in the world, and over a period of time, we find that the top 10% of the world population, right, has more wealth to it, much more wealth to it than the bottom 50%. So the top 10%, and then you start looking upwards and all, 5%, top 5%, top 1%, you see that the top 1% has more access to more household income, wealth, resources, and all of that, then of course the bottom 50% of the world's population. So much so that Oxfam came up with, has come up with various reports suggesting, and in recent times, those suggestions have become sharper, that 1% of the global population, the top 1%, the rich 1% of the global population controls 46% of the world's resources and wealth. Now, that is a huge thing. In course of time, as we have been looking at several data across, and you can Google up and you can find out on global inequality, you would find that the income gap is not that large, right? Whereas the wealth gap has become larger. The wealth gap between the rich and the poor has become much larger, whereas the income gap is not so large. So anyone who argues that globalization has brought about more opportunities, more income opportunities to people, yes and no. Yes, it may have brought in some sorts of opportunities, but that only exists at the income level. They never translate into wealth disparities. The wealth disparities are a different phenomenon altogether. But anyway, so what I wanted to open up this whole discussion with is to say that some of these things, globalization, that the inequality that is brought in the wake of globalization, many feel that it cannot be undone, not at least by the states. Because the states have thrown up their hands. They have, in a way, said that we will only tinker with there are forces beyond our borders that impinge on our decision-making processes. And we cannot be any longer, as we used to do, in the business of redistributive justice any longer. So we can only tinker with a little bit of that redistributive justice. We can maybe give some extra social protections to people. And many political parties try to, raise their collar by saying that, we have done the maximum for, ensuring social protections. But that is so minimum, in the face of these huge inequalities that have appeared in the world around. And so globalization has brought to us not only the realization of the deepening of inequality, but has also impressed upon us the constraints that the states face in trying to ameliorate the conditions of the poor. Now, and this is not just about poverty. Another way in which we could link it with some other issue, let us say climate change, for instance. Now, climate change is one huge issue on which no one nation can actually take a call. It has to be, climate change calls for a certain kind of what we might call a collective action problem. So there is a collective action issue with regard to climate change. How should nation states come together to address the ways in which climate change has started affecting people, the ways in which climate change is actually forcing people to be poorer, is creating a different variety of population in the world. And we are not yet face to face with that kind of a reality. And that is, in the next couple of decades, we will have huge numbers of peoples migrating as climate refugees. There will be huge number as climate refugees. Now, if climate refugee is one thing, then this whole question of migration is another issue on which states also cannot do much except for tightening the borders, saying that no one can enter my state, no one can enter my borders. But the gravity of the entire question of migration is something that individual states cannot solve this matter. It's a global problem. So what I'm trying to say is that whether it is with regard to poverty, or whether it is with regard to climate change, or whether it is with regard to migration, or even conflict, including intrastate conflict and interstate conflict, what you find is that these are all global issues and that call for global remedies/solutions. Now, when we are faced with these kinds of global issues and problems, it makes sense to engage with them not on a case-by-case individual basis, but why not have a framework as such? And that framework has been around for quite some time, by the way. But that was a theoretical, philosophical framework. It didn't have the necessary inputs for what kind of politics did we want to engage with at the global scale? And that's why I bring in the whole question of global south. Right? So let us go one step at a time. So there is a relevance for talking about a global justice. You can talk about global governance. You might think that, okay, maybe another candidate would be global governance. But what do we understand by global governance today? If you are thinking about, the United Nations, how constrained even the United Nations is in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, and how constrained it was in the past and listening to the diktat of the United States of America. So whenever we speak about the global governance or even the multilateral institutions, one thing that leaps out very clearly is this, and that is it is not just a symptom of domestic societies or nation states that the rich and the powerful control all institutions. This is a global phenomenon. So the rich and the powerful nation states also control the global institutions. And so talking about global governance is a sheepish acknowledgement of what we cannot do. So to expect the United Nations to come and solve these issues, or even the World Bank to come and solve these issues, we know is not done. It's just not possible. It's impossible. Look at the World Trade Organization, for instance. Has it changed the terms of trade or the terms of inclusion of the global South countries, knowing fully well that there is a huge inequality between the North and the South? Nothing. The World Trade Organization doesn't do it. But on the face of it and in paper, it's a democratic multilateral organization. Everybody has a right to vote, an equal right to vote. And yet we know that whenever it comes to bargaining and striking deals on something that is more acceptable to the United States or the more rich and the powerful or the OECD countries, then there is a lot of backroom lobbying. There is an arms twisting that goes in the back room. And people are forced to agree to the proposals given forth by the United States. The max that they would do is maybe consult India, China, Brazil, Russia, but that is usually a tokenistic consultation. It doesn't carry much sense. Some observers think that why is there so much at stake in the American presidential elections? Billions of dollars are spent in an American presidential election. Why? Why are most of the multinational corporations pumping money into the American elections? The answer is very simple. Because whoever holds the American president in his or her fist holds the whole world. So the rules of the trading game, for instance, or the rules of, where should money go, where should it be nested, can it be kept safe? These are largely dependent on the political choices that a few countries make in these global institutions. So, global governance is not a good alternative to the whole question of global justice. Some people think that, well, why not speak about global democracy, increase the democratic participation of the global South countries? Eventually, yes, but on a short-term basis, especially when you are faced with more morally urgent issues like global poverty, you cannot wait up to infinity in order to solve this issue, saying that, let the world be a little more perfectly democratic society. So many of you have heard about, so let me now briefly get into this whole question of justice and global law. Now, I'm no longer in the business of giving definitions of this or that. And I think definitions constrain us in many ways. And we should have a thought that is much wider. because even political theory and political principles change over a period of time, responding to the changing nature of politics. No political theory can be held in a static manner. And, or, you can't take a snapshot of a frozen view of the world, or one that was taken in 1950s by Harold Lasky or 1970s by Rawls, and say that this is the picture perfect idea of justice. No, because Rawls never discussed, or people in his time never discussed, the whole question of environment. And people later have started, they won't discuss justice without discussing environment. But a lot has also happened. Around the late 80s and the early 1990s, there was a wave of scholarship that not only critiqued someone like John Rawls and his theory of justice, but they also tried to extend the application of the Rawlsian principles of justice by saying that although Rawls did say that his principles of justice or his theory of justice is only relevant to, let us say, the Anglo-American societies. But, as it happens with any poetry, once it is written, it is the license of the reader to interpret it in any manner it's possible, beyond even what the interpretation that has been, whatever the poet had thought of. In a similar manner, once you create a work in normative theory, for instance, and present a picture of some sort of a utopia, a realistic utopia or whatever, it is no longer under your control to say that I meant it. And then others would say, yes, you may have meant that, but I have the right to extend the argument a little further. So the best critiques of Rawls have actually used Rawls against Rawls. And what do I mean by that? I mean by that Rawls speaks about the difference principle, right? Most of you know what the difference principle is. That the gap between the top income earners and the bottom income earners, let us say, in a language that we all can understand, should not be too huge. That we should mind the difference and we should try to narrow it down. We can't go for perfect equality because Rawls was talking about justice in a liberal society. So if you have to respect people's choices, there will be bound to be some sort of an inequality, and some kind of an inequality is also good in some ways. But I'm talking about that kind of an inequality that can be morally defended. And you say that, okay, if people have worked hard or have some sorts of talents, again, that is a little debatable. But if they have worked hard vis-a-vis somebody who's not working too much, then maybe we can say that, okay, he deserves that extra reward, that extra, whatever. So a little bit of that inequality is not that bad in a society. But how big should it be? So Rawls's candidate for criticism was the utilitarian logic. So Rawls criticized the utilitarian logic, striking at the root of what the greatest good of the greatest number is all about. Saying that when you're trying to conjure up the total productivity of society through the use of the maxim greatest good of the greatest number, then of course, the ones that have been left out below the greatest good are ones that we have started harming and ones we have, taken for granted in our system. And even if they suffer. So, and, the actual practical parallels of this are countries like South Korea, Taiwan, right? People do speak about these countries, saying that, look at their growth rates. They are so phenomenal. They are doing so well, right? But nobody raises questions about what kind of an inequality they have. So people are excited about growth rates. and not so much about development. There is another parallel debate going on in political science between growth versus development. People like Atul Kohli, Amartya Sen have all contributed to this debate that growth alone is not enough. We need in countries like South Korea, China, not Taiwan and Singapore, what you call the tiger economies, the East Asian tiger economies, they have actually followed a utilitarian model of the greatest good of the greatest number. So if you did a kind of a statistical tabulation of what percentage, so you would see that the majority, that the top 75% produce a lot, and then the bottom 25% do not produce much. They are poor, and no one cares for them. So that is why Rawls would say that he would introduce another term in this whole thing, and he would say that in order to counter the utilitarian argument, we have to think about, and mark my words, these are not very tough words, the moral separateness of persons. That people and persons are morally separate from each other, that they cannot be put together under the umbrella, howsoever appealing it might be, of the greatest good of the greatest number. So each person counts, and each person is morally separate from the rest, and we have to count every individual. So it is too often we criticize Rawls for his individualism without understanding why this individual did come in the first place. Though it is not only to Rawls's credit. There is a long tradition, the social contract tradition and all that. And those days it was necessary. If you look at the philosophical justification of why we had to introduce the whole idea of individualism, you will understand that it was meant to counter feudal relations. So when you are connected with each other through vertical and hierarchical chains, you had to cut each of those links and put them all horizontally separate. And so individualism, something that is adduced to by someone like Alexis Tocqueville also talks about democracy in America, but sorry, I will not digress there. So the point that Rawls makes is very clear. It is individualism. And now the critics of Rawls felt that even if Rawls meant that the difference principles should be applied in an Anglo-American context with which he is very familiar, why not challenge ourselves to imagine that the difference principle can be extended to the whole planet? Why shouldn't we call for a global difference principle? Knowing fully well that our birth in particular societies is morally arbitrary. It's just an accident that someone is born in an African country, and morally arbitrary, given that the person is then thrust with a very constrained set of choices for having been born into a certain family, let us say, a certain caste family. That's how we can understand in the Indian context. Or, if you belong to, let's say, Kenya or Rwanda, something like that, then, so what would equal opportunity mean in a global context? Why, if there is so much of abundance of resources all around, why should I be always at the receiving end? Now, when you start with these questions, we are, of course, looking a lot more critically at the whole phenomenon and patterns of colonialism, which was responsible for the oppression and exploitation of a great many people around the world. So global justice is not disconnected with understanding the political processes of colonialism. It is very much connected with that. It gets its moral stimulus looking at the background, looking at the past of the colonial past at the global scale. But one, even if Rawls is seen as a liberal thinker, the liberals threw one of the most significant challenges to the world, going by a certain kind of a Kantian influence, Immanuel Kant, who had a kind of a cosmopolitan philosophy of looking at how whatever we do, we must do thinking about the humanity at large. So Kant had a huge influence on Rawls. And so people reread Rawls again through a Kantian influence and saying that why can't we have a global difference principle? Why can't we have a cosmopolitan approach to justice where individuals matter in the world around? And we should then examine the existing inequalities or the existing deep injustices that exist in the world around us, and examine from a planetary perspective rather than a nation state perspective, not from within, but from outside. Look at the whole world around us and see what's going wrong where. And can we have a global perspective on some of the ills that attend to us? So I've tried to simplify this whole understanding of what global justice implies. And theoretically, where does it get its influence from? So the two people who took upon themselves this particular task of extending Rawls were Charles Baez, B-E-I-T-Z, and Thomas Pogge. So Charles Baez, in his work in political theory and international relations, somewhere in the late 70s, I think, or early 80s, speaks about the extension of the argument of Rawls. And then it is taken over by Thomas Pogge, who was himself a student of Rawls, and challenged him to think and to frame the Rawlsian thinking a lot differently. And many of those who extended the Rawlsian argument completely disagreed with and critiqued the later Rawls on political liberalism and all of that. And Rawls wrote another book, The Law of Peoples, connecting with this whole question of global justice. But he was a lot less interesting than his own students and his followers. So his students and followers had taken over and they were doing much better job than what Rawls was proposing in The Law of Peoples. Now that's a book I also teach my students, and basically with the purpose of asking them to think about what is it that Rawls is saying, and can we think beyond this? How might we best critique him, and so on. Anyway, I will not take you into the detour of those things. Now, given this kind of, the normative spring of global justice, and what is it that we are thinking about when we talk about the framework of global justice, and what are its philosophical foundations, the one thing that you might think of is, why talk about the global South? It's obvious that whenever we are talking about global justice, we ought to be connected directly with the inequalities that exist between the North and the South. So why talk about the global South separately and also in conjunction with what we are discussing under the rubric of global justice? One way to address this is to say that in spite of the best of the attempts made by the global justice scholars, one thing is very clear, and that is most of the global justice scholars belong to the global North. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And They are very sound theorists, by the way. And most of the time they're traveling in the global south, by the way. And yet there is a pressure from within the global south to think in terms of decolonizing that particular political philosophy also. So it's not enough to decolonize the institutions, the existing global political institutions, or our own political institutions, or the different discourses that exist and which aid in the ways in which we form particular institutions. But how must we also decolonize political theory? And the charge here is that much of what goes by the name of political philosophy is actually Western political philosophy. I'm not even saying that, I'm past that particular argument where people say that, we should also be talking about the non-Western political philosophy. I'm not very much agreeable and sympathetic to that view. And I have reasons for that. The reasons are that, just because there is something like a Western political philosophy, must we have a non-Western political philosophy? There are people like Bhikkhu Parekh and others who have made a huge contribution to these areas of thought on grounds of celebrating difference, getting to know what the other part of the world is talking about, who are their canonical figures and all that. But I have somewhere found that it is a slippery slope of a certain kind of a relativism, getting into shoes of people, so tomorrow if you're talking about the non-Western political philosophy, day after you would be talking about Savarkar's political philosophy. There's no end, so it's a slippery slope. On the other hand, there is another reason, and the reason is that the political experiences that people have in the global south, by the way, are not very different from what people in the global north also have. There are human rights violations everywhere. Democracy faces similar challenges everywhere. Most people in the world are neither traditional nor modern. We are all hybrid. Or as Salman Rushdie once said, that we are history's bastards. Sorry for the language, but that's what he said. So what did he mean by when he said that we are history's bastards? He was actually critiquing colonialism in some ways, but he was also somewhere alluding to the fact that, yes, what Ashish Nandy would say, the intimate enemy. I'm with him and yet I'm not with him. I'm close temperamentally to what my colonial masters had introduced me to, because I see a certain level of modernity or modern experience that I can share with some people around. And yet, I must stake out a zone of difference and say that, we can think about it. I think those discussions will come to an end very soon. The more immediate challenge, I think, for political philosophy, and that is another reason why I speak of and do, and I've started doing my research on global justice, is this, and that is we should no longer be thinking about non-Western political philosophy versus Western political philosophy. Let's start building up this non-Western thing, or the Indian political theory or Indian political philosophy. I don't say it doesn't exist. It does. It has a flavor of its own. But at the bottom of it, what are we doing actually? We are engaging with issues of freedom, egalitarianism, all those things. There are a set of constitutional values that are globally applicable. They may have a contextual flavor, and that contextual flavor may change from place to place. But they all are global values. So we are actually moving towards the construction of global political philosophy in a real sense. But that global political philosophy can only enrich the world if it includes within it if not the very neat theoretical formulations by academics from the global south, but also the different voices from the global south, including the political voices in the global south. Too often what happens whenever we talk about the non-Western political philosophy and all that, it is the elites of certain societies that capture a certain kind of a discourse and say that this is non-Western, this is Indian, accept it. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to listen to the voices of the global south. And the global south exists as much in much of North America and Europe, by the way, in all the big cities, New York, Detroit, Chicago. You go anywhere, you will see a part of that global south. You will see a part of that global south in London too. And you will also see a part of that global north in India too. So these are not geographically limited, these constructions of the global north and south. And yet what is happening is that these are by and large political constructions. So we usually say that, people belonging to the countries of the Latin America, Africa, and Asia together, these three continents, what we used to call them the developing world, are now the global south. So it is a political movement in some ways. And yet they are fighting their own battles within, their class battles within, the battles with the global north within their own countries. They're also doing that. Even while they're, taking on the might of those hugely rich and powerful countries of the world. So it is essential that we have to take into account the interests of the global south. But if you have to create a discourse around the global south itself, interest is a very mild term. It's a very mild term. We have to rethink this particular aspect of political theory. Would stakes be a stronger term than interest? Interest is something that was conceived, let us say by Joseph Raz, or people like Ronald Dworkin, John Rawls. They were talking about interests at stake. And that has a certain tradition coming down from the Hobbesian tradition right down to these people. So interest, in my view, is a very milder term. If I was exploited during the colonial times, I would say my interests were harmed. If today I'm also at the receiving end of that, I would say my interests are harmed. And the harm to my interests have they remained constant all through these centuries? Or should we think about revolutionizing and making some of these concepts a little more dynamic and a little more lively? What can capture the dynamism of some of these political concepts if we brought in the time element to it? How would something like the whole question of harm relate to issues of climate change for the future generations? So it is on these issues that the global south needs to speak up more. And we can only do so if we engage with the issues of global justice in a much more systematic manner. There are people I know, and some of my students also I know, who are more interested that whenever they talk about global justice, they would say, oh, let's talk about Gandhi, sir. Gandhi is better than Rawls, no? I said, yes and no. But what is interesting that Gandhi gives, other than saying that we all have obligations? यहाँ पे तो हम राइट से रियलाइज नहीं कर पा रहे हैं और ऑब्लिगेशंस की एक बात ही क्या है, राइट? यू गेट द पॉइंट. द पॉइंट इज दैट हमें लोगों को राइट्स टाको ही सिक्योर करि पारुनु. ऑब्लिगेशंस तो बहुत दूर କଥା. So, but I do not deny that there are parts of that Gandhian thought which I find very, very morally appealing. But I cannot say that, the whole thinking on global justice, let us say from an Indian perspective, can revolve around a Gandhian view, a worldview, so to say. It cannot. He has made a deep imprint on people's minds, fine. There are many things that I learn and many things that I'm inspired by. But I can't reduce everything to that one framework that Gandhi did. I would much rather hold a much more dynamic, a politically dynamic understanding of global justice. And then I would say I'm as likely to borrow from Gandhi as I am from Immanuel Kant, as I am from anyone else. I'm truly looking for a global political, but a discourse in which I must have my say and not allow only, and not just not allow, but not just allow the discourse to be taken up by only a few scholars and philosophers working in North American universities and some of the Ivy League universities and all that. And I have had many such debates and arguments with many of these scholars. Right? And yet, we need to challenge these kinds of views. Now, it's already 7. So what I propose doing now is speak about something you may not even know. And that is, for the next maybe 5-10 minutes or 15 minutes, I would like to speak on something very different. So I'm not going to open up yet another discussion on Kant, on global justice, who said what and all that, to conceptually map out the entire debates and discourses, the first wave of global justice scholarship versus the second wave, third wave. These you can all read. These you can all Google up and read. There's not much I can say. Only if you're convinced that this is a powerful paradigm that is now forcing us to rethink the central ways in which we do political theory, then I think my job is done. But let me move on to something else. And that is, this is an example I like giving my students. And this is an example of what I would call illicit financial flows. Now, most of you wouldn't have even heard of this term. Illicit financial flows, right? Many of you may have relatives who have an IIT background and then an IIM background. And one or two of them might actually end up working for a multinational bank. And I don't understand why. You are a graduate in, let us say, chemical engineering or mechanical engineering. Then you do something in IT, or you do a management. And then you work for Ernst & Young. Why? Why should you work for Ernst & Young? Or why should you work for PwC? The reasons are very simple. So this person will tell you, oh, I get a lot of money. How much of money do you get? Oh, unthinkable. And he won't tell you exactly. What is his job? One of my nephews did this and he told me, but he reads a lot, economics and all that. So he told me what goes on in the life of such a so-called a finance expert. And he's a computer science BTech from IT, and then did his MTech from somewhere in the US, and then started working for a bank I won't name. But it's, one of those leagues, Standard Chartered, Citibank and all those things. So I asked him, what do you do? And is it true whatever I've heard you do is right? He said, what? I said, I have heard that you go to the bank, you do a lot of trading and all that the whole day, and then you are asked to leave, and all that trading you have done, the intraday trading, that is all destroyed at the end of the day. It's all destroyed. And then you go back home happy because, and then you're taken to parties, to one of the biggest clubs, the very exclusive clubs. You may have seen that movie, that Hollywood movie, Eyes Wide Shut. That's the kind of life we are talking about. Watch it if you haven't. Eyes Wide Shut. So he said, yes, this is the life I lead. And he told me that at the end of the day, we shred all pieces. And so the banks, which are known to keeping all records, why would they shred? Shred, paper shredding machines. They put all this data inside the paper shredding machine, shred them. Nobody can read them. All evidences are gone. And then they are back home happy or back in their clubs, leading a very, very nice life. But what did they do the whole day? And what do they do? Day in and day out, every day. There is a pattern to it. What they end up doing is engage in illicit financial flows. This is happening in the heart of Manhattan or in London. And fingers are pointed at the global South countries saying that you guys are corrupt. You do this corruption. You give bribes to government people. We don't do that, but you do something far worse. So if you're talking about illicit financial flows, and our political rhetoric and discourses have been such that whenever, anybody who says, Acha, illicit financial flows, what does it mean? Are we talking about black money? Which is stashed in the Swiss banks, which one of our leaders promised that he will get back to us and never did. And yet everybody will keep swearing by the Swiss bank accounts, saying that they will get us back all those money. The black money only amounts to 30 to 35% of the illicit financial flows in the world. 65% of the illicit financial flows owe to the bad illicit trading practices of the multinational corporations. 65% of the world's total volume of the illicit financial flows is contributed to by the multinational corporations. That's really a huge amount, you would say. And that amounts to actually billions of dollars. Billions of dollars are siphoned off the global South, not always into the global North countries, but into some tax havens. And they are not always in the global North, by the way. Multinationals have no nationalism, right? That's why they're multinationals. No nationality. So when you're talking about, so if you look up on the work of the Global Financial Integrity, an organization that works in New York, you would notice what kind of volume of illicit funds have been siphoned off the global South. How does it happen? It is because, again, of the grip that the global institutions and the global norms have over people like us and the different countries. Most of the global South countries go mad in trying to attract foreign investment. Much of our foreign investment, do you know where it comes from? Mauritius. Do you know what kind of a money is Mauritius pumping back into our own country? Our own illicit wealth. Money robbed from India comes back as foreign direct investment. It's difficult to stomach this, right? We usually think that if there is a huge billions of dollars have come in as foreign direct investment, it must have come from the US or Germany. But that money is very fickle. That capital is very fickle, we know. Anytime there is a crash in the stocks, then that money flows out. But here we're talking about a certain volume of transactions that keeps going out of the country and keeps coming back. And many of the global south countries also not only attract foreign direct investment, they want to give all favorable, tax holidays to the multinational corporation. Please, aa jao, hame naukri de do, hum aapko tax nahi karenge, that sort of a thing. So many of these multinational corporations have tax holidays. They don't have to pay a penny at times for years together to the host countries. How do they manage their profits? Well, there is a term in economics called transfer pricing. You can Google it up and you can find many YouTube videos on transfer pricing. But explained very simply, transfer pricing means this: that because the rates of taxation can be very high in one country, then what these multinational corporations do is that they hold sister companies in several places. So let us say if there is Foster beer is produced in India, then there is the parent company is in Netherlands. And you have to pay the copyright fees to Netherlands. So you have taken their copyright to produce this beer, right? And is there a rate for the copyrights? No, alarmingly, there is no fixed rate at all. It is arbitrary and arbitrarily fixed by any product company. It can go up to the two. So it can take away half of the profits like that. Another part can be taken up by another company, let us say in Germany or in UK, which is taking care of the transport of the goods, the distribution of the goods. Another would be selling their management services to the same company. And these are all sister companies. And management services, how much do you pay for? Well, don't ask me. The team will decide from time to time. So if in Africa, beer is produced in Ghana and it has to move to, let us say, another neighboring country here or here, it has to go to Kenya, then the simpler route would have been the land route, right? Across from Ghana to Kenya. But no, on paper, the paper trail will show that the money has gone out, around the ocean, across the Horn of Africa, all over to Kenya and given here. And who is controlling all this transfer? On paper, there is a firm in Mauritius, which is a one-room house, and they are controlling all this money trail and the fictitious cost of transport. So by some estimates, by people like Dev Kar, I actually do not know whether he's an ODA or not, but Dev Kar, who works for Global Financial Integrity and has many papers to his credit, he says that actually he has laid down graphs of how billions of dollars have been siphoned off the global south. And where does it end? It ends in the tax havens. So there is all the sister companies. They fleece money from one parent company. So much so that these companies are thinly capitalized and they do not make any more expansion. So if the political climate goes hotter, then they will exit immediately because the profits have already gone. So compared to the billions of dollars that go out as illicit financial flows, some of these countries, where these companies are situated or headquartered, will give us aid, foreign aid in millions of dollars. Billions of dollars are going away and only millions of dollars are coming in, trickling in. It's a huge, huge difference. Why did I speak about illicit financial flows? I spoke about illicit financial flows because, much like the World Trade Organization, we actually need a World Tax Organization, but a lot better one than the World Trade Organization. We need a global institution that controls the outflow of funds from the global south to the global north. So we have to institutionally regulate this. And for that, we need a very strong. So the OECD has gone ahead and has worked on some of these tax havens. And so some of these multilateral institutions are really serious about it. And to some extent, even I think it was in the SDGs. I guess it is in 14, or maybe I will check and say again. That the whole question of the illicit financial flows are spoken of, even in the Sustainable Development Goals. But there is no clarity, even with some of our best of the multilateral institutions, and they do not wish to engage with some of these issues. And that's a big shame. So the reason I was talking about, expanding and connecting the whole framework of global justice, not just with the philosophical issues, but with the political issues that actually affect the future of the global south, is very much required. And so I gave you one example of the illicit financial flows. So this is a grave injustice to many countries in the global south. And yet, the governments of those countries take it as a matter of credit that they were able to invite others. And as you call in economics, this is usually followed by a policy of what we call beggar thy neighbor policy. Beggar thy neighbor. Oh, you are going to Pakistan? No, come here. What is Pakistan offering you? 2 years of tax holidays? We will give you 10 years of tax holidays. Come here. Are you thinking of going to Bangladesh? No, come here. So there is a kind of a competition, and that's a very false one, because everybody gets to lose. Especially, the global south countries, they get to lose. And yet the governments take credit for it, and no one ever brings out. So the moment you raise the whole question of Mexico in the United States, the one thing that everybody will think of, migration. Mexicans are notorious migrants. But has anybody looked at the record of the illicit financial flows that have flown out of Mexico to the US or to other North American countries? No. Probably if we did, and if we had plugged that hole long time back, we wouldn't have seen this kind of a grave inequality within Mexico, which has actually nudged the Mexicans to leave their country. Migration, and usually when there is a migration, then people take a left inclined view, a right inclined view, and all of those things. But this discourse is so much rendered irrelevant when you look at what is actually happening to Mexico in terms of the global flow of funds. And so Mexico would have been saved from a lot of this inequality, from the humiliation of migration, especially of the illegal kind. So there is an illicit financial flow and nobody's talking about it, but there is an illegal migration from Mexico to the US and everybody's speaking about it. And then even political theory tries to engage with these issues with very neat formulations. What kind of citizenship can we offer to these Mexicans? So I am pushing you to think a little deeper and look beyond the political discourses that have been constructed for you, using the whole idea of global justice as a foil, for instance. I'm asking you to think beyond and to question. Why have you been constructed by certain kind of discourses? And you tear apart the curtains you will see that there is a different kind of a reality facing starkly at you. So if you do political science tomorrow, or if you are influenced by some of these ideas, as for instance, the idea of global justice, your research will speak to a wider world, and you will be hopefully a better citizen when you are trying to engage with some of these issues. So with these words of hope, and I didn't get too much into political theory. I hope I haven't disappointed anyone by not doing, the nitty-gritty of, the jargon, political theory jargon. So I've stayed away from the jargon all through. But I wanted to send the message across that here is one very fertile area that screams for your attention, for your collective attention, if not for anything else, at least for the future of the discipline or social sciences more generally. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So thank you, sir. I mean, it was really a thought-provoking talk, and some of the things, again, I will re-listen your talk when I will upload it on YouTube. Many things you brought. And right now, we have to think over it. I think I will introduce this course in Sambalpur University. Right now, I just become the board member of Board of Studies. I think the concept what you are thinking and you are doing research on global politics. Basically, this is an alternative to the sectarian justice, either justice from the Western political theory side, or there is something called Indian political theory side. And I used to think that if there is a thesis, then there must be an antithesis. Then there is a possibility of synthesis. If there is something called Western political thought, and we can also develop something called Indian political thought. These are various perspectives. We are dealing with that freedom, that right and duty that are related. Maybe after this emergence of Indian political theory, or what in broadly we can say that Orientalist theory, then I think that may contribute towards that global political philosophy. So you talked about global political philosophy. Yes, it must be there. It must be there. There is a possibility that while developing the Indian political theory, one may develop Savarkar political theory. Yes, there is a possibility. I agree with that. But then who will take the leading role creating the global political philosophy? Is it global north or global south? And in your lecture, you told that most of the people who think about global south, they belong to global north, and there is a global north in global south, and there is a global south in the global north. And to create a global philosophy, intelligence is required. And who will provide that intelligence? Who will be the hero of making this global political philosophy? While teaching elite theory, generally that one statement always comes. It is because of the nature of masses, elites are elite, and we know that justice means favoring the poor. Justice means standing with weak. Justice means siding with have-nots. But how to do that, sir? And in your talk, you said economics. I mean, without the understanding of economics, you cannot understand politics. There are many technicalities in economics. One need to now. I have to also understand in order to understand that larger politics that is happening, globally. Globalization is not at all good for the global, justice. Or you said global governance is antithetical to the global justice. Now, how to create that global political philosophy? That's, I think, it's my concern, and I'm also thinking through it. I'm influenced by your talk, and I will definitely try to introduce these quotes at Sambalpur University. And also, you will be very happy that I have also started teaching ethics and politics. That is also very important. That is very, very important. I have seen the
Oh, that's
quote
awesome. That's awesome.
that's
So you need any help from my side, you are most welcome. I will.
I'll
Now that you're
definitely.
teaching ethics and politics, and then you plan to do global justice, that will be awesome if you do that.
That's true. That there are many things that I need to learn first. I need to understand. You know,
Right.
you know, to develop Indian political theory, there is also the requirement of Western political theory. Now, without the help of Western political theory, you cannot develop the Indian political theory. But then we have to create some alternative or some, antithesis. Otherwise, synthesis, it will be very difficult to create a synthesis without any antithesis. So this is, my observation on your talk. Now, I ask my colleague, Dr. Patel, to give his observation, and he will respond to our observation. Then I'll go back to the questions asked by the students.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. Actually, let me start by congratulating Professor Acharya for his splendid presentation. If you have noticed in the beginning, when you entrusted me to the task of introducing the global justice and global south, I was little bit confused. What could be the framework or that will be coming under both the ideas? This is because I am not hesitating to indicate that this is because I have not been exposed to the global justice discourse and also the global south relation with global justice discourse. As a student of political science, I was guessing that this might be probably the framework on which Professor Acharya will be speaking so far as global justice is concerned, and he will try to link the global south into the concept of global justice. But after listening to him, I am extremely happy, and I was present all throughout his presentation. And it was like listening a beautiful story. It is like a Hindi movie. He was presenting it in such a way that I was just listening and listening and listening. And I'm enlightened actually. I'm very glad to be part of this his presentation. I could understand. Actually, I will rather advise Dr. Mishra, Himanshu Mishra, to introduce the topic of global justice, the syllabus, global justice and this global south in the Sambalpur University. I don't think that in Sambalpur University, even for that matter in Odisha, maybe Berhampur or Utkal, I don't think that this course is there. That what is global justice and global south, how both the things are related. And this is not there probably in our syllabus. Neither we nor our students are exposed to such a wide range of discourse. And actually, the relevance of this topic, the webinar, the global justice and global south is very futuristic. In future, actually, this is what we are to deliberate upon. Instead of deliberating upon Western political philosophy, what Plato, what Aristotle has been doing and all that, and even for that matter, Indian political philosophy since long, right from the beginning, we have to reopen ourselves and we have to re-debate on the Indian southern perspective of this global political philosophy. Listening to Professor Acharya, now I could understand that global justice is a thing which is going to be more prominent in future. And as you were speaking, it is being taught in University of Delhi. As you know, they are advanced. But in the say, state universities and all other parts of the countries, they should introduce this topic. It has got a very relevance for the future. By now, I am totally clear that what is the basic framework of global justice and how global south is there, how global south is connected to global justice. and it has been very pleasure. It is a pleasure and it is an honor to listen Professor Acharya. I think that I am enlightened and I could know a lot of things. Thanks, Professor Acharya, for this presentation, and also thank you, Dr. Himanshu, for the initiative. With these few words, I once again request Himanshu to carry forward the rest of the proceedings. Thank you very
So,
much.
so thank you, Dr. Patel. I am worried. I am worried because there is a problem. And as a political science student, I think we have a larger responsibility to address that problem. And from that perspective, I think I am interested to introduce these quotes. I think it is speaking something new, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
It is neither with the left nor with the south, sorry, nor with the right, neither with the north nor with the south. It speaks about the global. I mean, uh, in Gandhi concept, it's just like Sarvodaya, right? So
This
if justice prevail globally, then I think we should not be worried about anything. Even it includes environment also. It
yes,
includes environment.
most of the problems we are facing in the world will be eliminated if we have this global justice integrated into the global south, and global south has to be very active regarding this.
No, I
So
think I
you try
disagree.
at your level.
I disagree with you. I mean, the global north or south is not geographical entity. So,
Yes,
there is a global south in Britain, there is a global north in India or in Kenya also. Maybe
and that's
sir is
true.
talking about, elite and non-elite. So I think
Himanshu, may I say something?
yes,
Can you relieve me just for a few minutes? I will just go out. There is somebody waiting for me, and I'll
yes,
come back again. Huh? So
yes, yes,
just,
yes,
but
yes,
carry on with the conversation.
yeah.
And if there are some questions that you would want me to respond to, I'm happy to respond to them. So
Please, sir,
just give
come back.
me 2 or 3 minutes, okay?
Yes, yes, sir, come back, come back. So I think, Patel sir, Professor Acharya is talking about, those, powerless person. They represent the global south, and
Yes,
powerful are actually, global north. And we need to develop a global political philosophy which will work above than this, elite and non-elite, right?
yes, yes.
And it will give justice to all. It will provide liberty to all, and it will also work for the equality. It will also work for the, fraternity. And another interesting thing I found from his, talk is that uh, in a very little portion of redistribution is happening. You see the kind of, uh, what I will say, the kind of disparities between the rich and poor. On one hand, it is increasing hugely. 10% of world population, they are controlling near about the 50% of wealth, right? And how much, or how many percentage we are spending for social justice?
Yes,
That
yes.
is very minimum,
Very
right?
minimum.
So in a sense, it is just like a kind of, pretension. We are pretending like that we are with the poor, but at the same time the difference between the rich and poor is increasing. I
Actually,
think there.
if you have listened to him carefully, and I think you have done it, what he was telling was that uh, we have some global evils are there, and these global evils in the form of climate change, for example, violation of human rights, poverty, global inequality. We have a number of these things, and these things are to be tackled globally. Global problems should be tackled globally. And when you are talking about the global solutions regarding global problems, which globalization speaks, what is trying to indicate or what was trying to point out in this presentation is that you have to take care of the voices of the global south. Normally, what has happened in the past is that the voices of the global south has been neglected, and there has been exploitation. He was talking about the illicit financial flows, illicit financial flows from the south to the north. So money has been drained out from this part of the globe to the developed countries of the world. So on the one hand, we have been drained out, our resources have been taken by the north, and but on the other hand, while talking about solution, while talking about justice, our voices, our concerns, our problems are not taken care of. So therefore, when in his presentation he was trying to point out that we have to develop a framework, or we have to develop a new type of political science or political theory, or global. We have to construct. He was using the word that we have to construct a global political philosophy. And in this global political philosophy, what has to be there? The basic things. What has to be there? There has to be this global justice. And when you talk of global justice, you cannot afford to neglect the voices of the South. The South must be integrated actively in any development of a framework for global justice. And that is what is the relevance of this global justice and global South. And that is what has been done in the University of Delhi. And I think actually this is in a one way going extra from the traditional Western political philosophy and the even Indian political philosophy. He was talking about Gandhi and all that, and he's advocating that now the 21st century, in the new millennium, we have got some different global ills, global problems, and these global problems cannot be, though we have to respect the global political philosophy like Western political philosophy, starting from Plato or Monu Cotillio, we cannot neglect them. They give some perspective, but that perspective is an old one. We have to reinvent a new perspective from the side of the globe south, and that has to play an important role in the development of the a new type of global political philosophy, that is global justice, so that this world will be a better place. And actually, this is a contemporary solution to a contemporary problem. That is what the all presentation is all about, as far as I have understood. And actually, this is very relevant. And I once again tell you that such things has to be reincorporated in our syllabus, or if not a paper, at least we can a chapter on contemporary political issues where you can ask for global justice and global south. At least there will be a paper, or at least in a chapter there should be there as early as possible.
I think as a course we need to introduce it. I mean,
Yes,
in
that will be
one
fine.
talk, or one paper, you may not understand the whole thing.
Yes, yes,
You know, there are
insufficient.
it is conceptual, at the same time it is also factual. So we have to develop a concept out of facts.
Yes,
So we need to understand facts. We need to use the earlier concept to use to develop a perspective, and subsequently we'll develop a concept. So in one paper or one theme of any course, it's not enough
not
to
sufficient, not
understand.
sufficient
I
actually.
think we need to develop. It's a course actually. It's a course.
It should
We
be a
need
course. It
we
should be
need
a
to
course.
develop.
And yes, and this needs to be developed so that our students will be advanced and they can understand the global political realities, the global ills, global solutions, and they will be exposed to a new type of framework, and
I
this will
think
make them more advanced. Okay.
this global political philosophy is not a kind. I mean, it's not a new kind of philosophy. It's actually the
Yes.
old philosophy with a new perspective.
Yes. Old philosophy is
The
a new
way
perspective.
the way Professor Acharya said that what Rawls called, or once within a nation state, it can be extended to the globally, and then
Yes.
we can also work out on that, right? So
Yes.
you are limiting within the nation state. Now we need to broaden it, right? We need to apply it in the globe, so that I think justice means equality will continue, but
Yes.
that that huge difference between the rich and poor should be minimized.
Minimize. Yes.
The more it is minimized, the better justice system we are having, right? So I think justice means that. Uh, okay, we'll wait for Professor Acharya.
Yes. We can wait
Hello.
for some more time.
Hello, Dr.
Yes,
Himanshu.
yes,
Uh,
yes,
uh,
yes, yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I am Dr. Dhirendra Kumar Jana,
Yes.
and I am the student of Professor Samsun Acharya.
Hmm.
I think you may recognize or may not recognize, because there is a large gap uh, from our last meeting.
Yeah. No, I know
And
you. I know you very well.
Yes. So I am serving in Rural Institute of Higher Studies in Bhogarai.
Yeah.
So actually, the Acharya sir has made a good deliberation, and theoretically, and it was theoretically, it's okay. But my point of question is that um, can in a liberal world society, uh, global justice, so far elimination of poverty can be possible?
No, I think what I understand from his lecture that we need to global justice will address the poverty, but elimination of poverty,
So it
I
may be
think
elimination or reduction.
reduction is
Elimination or
possible.
reduction. So
Reduction.
can it be possible to reduce, that means gap between rich and poor, or a difference of what Acharya sir was telling, be possible in liberal world society?
What he's saying that
Make
if the difference
can we make a global justice framework in the liberal world society?
I think he will be the appropriate person to handle it. But I think yes, we can
Yes.
do that. We can do that. But again, there are some who are also critiquing to this model, global justice or global political philosophy.
Because we know, and we are also teaching to our students that liberalism is good for politics, but there is adverse impact so far economy is concerned, because it creates rich and poor. It creates gap between the people when we provide so far laissez-faire concept or Adam Smith, or thereafter the neoliberalism concepts.
Yes, Dr. Jana,
Okay.
Dr. Jana. I mean, our speaker has
Yes.
already joined with us. I mean,
Yes.
Dr. Jana is also raising the same, kind of doubt. Is it really possible
Oh, Dhirendra Jana. Yes. Hello, how are you?
Sir, I'm well, sir. Fine.
You are still in Bhogarai. You are still in Bhogarai, right?
Yes. And when I knew, when I was informed from Dr. Himanshu that you are going to deliver this deliberation, then I became more fine. That means I became more happy.
So, sir, he is also, raising the same doubt that is it really possible to develop global justice? Is it really possible to develop global political philosophy? Is it really possible to, apply these different principles, at the global level?
No, this is why not? Actually, you had initially raised this question, Himanshu, that who's going to frame this and
Yeah.
from where, and is it does it also risk becoming another kind of an elite discourse again
Yeah.
from the global south? So all those risks are there, but no, I think the more we discuss these issues, the more of our students start doing research on this, you will find an answer somehow. I think it is more important that we need to talk about this a little bit more, to discuss this a little bit more, to write on this a little bit more. That will create a momentum for the generation of the right kind of global norms, that will then challenge the existing unequal, unjust regimes, institutions, and all those things. So, so it is important, and of course, when you are looking at the relations between norms and institutions, what comes first, we do not know. I mean, like even in ancient Greece, for instance, what came first? Whether it was the institution or whether it was the norms and all those things. But somewhere in this kind of a game, where we think that the global South needs to take a lot more initiative in trying to shape the future political discourse of global justice, I think it is important that we somewhere try to challenge the existing global norm, the existing quote unquote the global norms that has been set by the global norm as such. So we need to challenge those norms. And
Sir, let me ask you a very difficult question, and I know that it's very difficult. That the kind of politics global South around the world does, is it really contributing to the global justice, or their politics somewhere leading to global north?
no, actually, there is a level at which we are looking at the politics, and we need to look at it a little deeper. On the surface of it, we see a lot of identity politics, a lot of discredit being given to democracy. A lot of our political parties that are winning elections are also, taking democracy for a ride. We all know that. And yet, there is an undercurrent that is also happening at the same time. And I remain hopeful that gradually more and more people are seeing through the political games of particular political parties, and that it might take us a little longer. But during the COVID times, for instance, there was an undercurrent of disaffection with the government everywhere. And there was an undercurrent of some serious thinking on what the state might do when faced with crisis like this, and what they have actually done and what they should do. So people have started thinking about it. So if you are looking at many of the social movements that are taking place in the global South, whether it is from a feminist perspective, whether they are from an environmental perspective, they all are significant as they might be at the local level, but they are all contributing towards the generation of certain global norms. And that, I think, I didn't touch upon this aspect. I couldn't have touched on every aspect. But I'm here referring to this specifically because, even some local struggles will have a global voice. And especially in a world that is so deeply interconnected, I don't think, if I'm, for instance, researching on global justice and somebody is engaged with a local struggle, I can't say, oh, come on, don't think about local, think global. That's never going to happen. We also connect with the world through the worlds that we live in. We cannot just connect like that, right? We are not Kantian in approach in that sense. Nobody has even heard about Kant. But in our own small little local struggles carry, I don't want to give it too much of a, I do not want to romanticize this idea of local struggles. But what I'm trying to suggest is they somewhere go up and connect with and contribute to the generation of a new set of global norms that actually challenge. So the farmers' agitation, for instance, if you thought it was an Indian story, no. It has global overtones to it. And so it has inspired many people across that what kind of a state do we need? What sorts of regulations should we be, happy with? How can a certain kind of an undiscussed privatization take place in a democracy as such? So the farmer struggle in India, if you thought that, actors haven't got their lessons, they got their lessons in Punjab elections, that. The people, the citizens of Punjab, slapped tightly all the major political parties, right? So So yeah. So anyway, no, sorry. I was digressing. Yes, Himanshu.
It
Sir,
happens
actually,
actually when
Dr. Himanshu, please. Sir, actually, my question was that can global justice in respect of elimination or reduction of poverty be brought in a liberal world society? That was my question. Because where there is a liberalism, there is, laissez-faire, the view of laissez-faire, and we know liberalism is good for, politics, but bad for, economy. So in this respect, and thereafter you think about, market society, that neoliberalism. So in this respect, in a liberal global society, can it be possible to bring, global justice? That was my question, sir.
Okay, no, Dhirendra, you, I think, if you do a little bit more of readings on liberalism, which you might do at some point of time, you would actually stop from seeking equivalences between a liberal order with laissez-faire and all that. There are various kinds of liberalisms that we are talking about, but the one that we are trying to, the one that somewhere includes a framework like global justice is not really that classical liberal or that neoliberal kind of a framework. Here we are talking about, respecting people's choices, for instance, yes, but not allowing our economic institutions to have a free play in the lives of people. So, and that can also be defended within the liberal tenets itself. That so what corrodes my freedom, for instance, and how should I, constrain those, those factors that, those constraints need to be constrained that limit my choices. So within that framework, and then of course there are tons of positions within the left liberal spectrum. So I'm talking about a left liberal spectrum, which is where most of us belong to actually. Even if you want it or you do not want it, most of us belong within that left liberal spectrum. Whatever we may say. Yes.
So thank you, sir. I mean, and we are living in, it's globalization. It's a globalized world. I think justice has to be global, otherwise, justice cannot reach to the people. Simple. It's very simple. You cannot limit your justice within your nation state when your economy is guided by the, globalization. We need some, global parameter. I totally agree with you, sir. I think we need to develop it.
Can I respond to some of the questions in the chat box?
Sir, can you read, or I will ask the student to directly ask you?
Oh, that will be superb if they want to.
Okay.
Because I also get to interact with them.
Yes.
But with one rider, please come on screen and
okay.
Put your video on.
Okay, Abhiram, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now you have to unmute your audio and video, and you can ask your question directly to our speaker.
Actually, sir, I am in a marketplace, so I am unable to.
Okay, you cannot show your face. Okay, you speak your question or tell your question.
So, wait, sir.
Okay, I can read it. I can read it, Abhiram. You are
Yes,
in
sir.
a marketplace, and I won't force you. So
in the market,
what are
attending the talk. Sir, I think it will be good if you'll read it.
Yeah. What are the implications of the North-South politics from environmental point of view, and how can you delineate the South perspective while we come up with this of environmental problems as the world facing today in contemporary time? Is there really any global justice, since the South has been underestimated by the superior North from everywhere? Yeah, well, that's exactly the point that I was trying to raise.
Sir, he is doing PhD on this environmental politics.
Okay. So but good that you're doing it. And there is, I'm forgetting the name of that author, but the name of the book I somehow remember. And this is something that I use in my readings also for the master students. There is a book by, oh, I'm not getting the author's name, but the book book called A Perfect Moral Storm. A Perfect Moral Storm. Please read that book. A lot of these, the things will be clearer. But then, what is its name? Stephen something. Anyway. So what this guy, Stephen, does is that, says that, it's not always possible to very neatly implicate the global north in climate change understandings and discourses. And I think somewhere he's also right, because he's saying across time and across geography, you do not know when you emit a certain gas, who is it going to affect and when, right? So even there's, there's, what do you call the greenhouse gas emissions take at times, thousands of years to disappear from the, and at times it may not. And so there is a dispersion between cause and effect. And so it is, so even if we have in ethics, something like a polluter pays principle or an equal contribution principle, many of them may not apply as, this guy is saying in his Perfect Moral Storm, that there is a dispersion between cause and effect over a long period of time and across a certain scale of geography. So, and yet at the same time, it doesn't mean that we absolve the global north of all the things that it has produced, because if you're going, let us say, by who can produce, who can consume how much, depending on how much the particular society has consumed in the last couple of decades or centuries, then Indians would be advised, can be let off with a far higher per capita consumption and emission of these greenhouse gases. But does it really, there is a collective responsibility for both North and the South. And then there are matters to be fixed between the North and the South. How do we take both these things together? Abhiram, I'll want you to think a little deeper. And maybe at some point of time, if you wish to join in a conversation with me, I can join in a conversation with you. That you have to look at this problem, not just in a starkly in a north-south manner, but you also have to look at it, how it is a collective issue. And so both the things are important. How the North has dominated the South, even on questions of environment, and yet how we should go for a collective resolution of this issue, or not even a resolution. What is a collective action issue in a climate change, for instance, is something that has to be addressed. Because if you are moving from mere, and you being a student of environment would know that if you're moving from mitigation to adaptation, so climate change mitigation is one thing, that is, you reduce the volume of greenhouse gas emissions. But the adaptation, you need a transfer of technology to go beyond, the use of oil, for instance, or the the non-renewable sources of energy to renewable sources. So for that, you need to have a smarter technology, a green technology, and that can only you can get. So when you're adapting to a different kind of a production system, then you require all the help that you should get, from all your global partners and, from the entire world as such. So, and when you're talking about adaptation, it becomes a collective issue. Though mitigation also is a collective issue. For instance, in Paris negotiations, we were talking about, and then later on, we were talking about what kind of targets should we set for different countries. And yet, we do not even arrive at a consensus. And that is at a very minimal level a question of mitigation. We haven't even moved the entire discourse to questions of adaptation. So collective action issues have still remain unresolved as yet at the global scale. So that is something.
One of my students has written that author's name, Stephen M. Gardiner.
Yeah. Stephen Gardner. Yes, Stephen M. Gardner. Somebody must have Googled up the name. A perfect.
we can do that.
Yeah. So I always forget this Gardner's name.
So there is another question asked by Sudham, that what is the stance of dependency theorists on global justice? How far they agree? How far they agree with the concept like global justice?
Yeah, well, it is, I would say, it is to the credit of what the dependency theory said that we are now looking at things a little more globally. But then that I could say was a first stop for somebody who's looking at a global south perspective of global justice. That is, we draw our inspiration from the dependency theorist, but we do not stop there. So we are looking at more complex problems that late 20th century and early 21st century people are facing everywhere. So if the dependency theory is one part of the understanding, then there are other issues that have crowded, that entire global framework. And those issues are related to migration, conflict, much beyond the scope of dependency theory in many ways. So, but yes, but I would say, this was a very, very a global South, completely a global South contribution to a globalized understanding, to a global understanding of what kind of relationships exist between the center and the periphery and all those things. So, and it came mostly from Latin America. So it is, the dependency theory has contributed a lot, I would say, and is a significant milestone in any thought about global political philosophy, I would say. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. Niyoti Abhipsa, can you directly ask this question to our speaker?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
She is one of the good students, sir, of PG first semester.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. So my question is, after the COVID pandemic, all the countries went after the concept of self-reliance. Self-reliance in the sense that once they are using their own powers and resources to build up their requirements. Is it going to impact the concept of global justice, sir?
I'm not sure about the later part. How can we relate them? But Niyati, my answer would be that did we go for self-reliance or we were forced to go for self-reliance because all the countries were shut down. So you could only rely on yourself. But if you're talking about Atmanirbharta across all the countries, well, some countries could afford to even speak about Atmanirbharta. We do not even know. So once they even those who spoke about Atmanirbharta and lambasted the use of Chinese goods knew pretty well and very soon enough that that the prices of your own commodities are going up, and the only way in which globally you could make a the only way in which you could give some choices to your own citizens was by giving them access to the Chinese goods. And so the Atmanirbharta has completely failed. Now, in fact, if you go to the market and try to buy an AC, you would know that there are very few ACs around in the country. Why? Because there is a lockdown in China. Right? So I do not know what kind of an Atmanirbharta or self-reliance we are talking about. Yes, in one respect, it has been a huge success, and that is in the production of vaccines. But not all countries can afford to do that. Right. So again, there are various models on which we look at issues of global health. So I don't want to comment much on that. But one of the models is that the global South countries have adopted for themselves is that they would violate the international copyright norms with regard to the production of medicines in their own countries. And they don't care. So India produces a lot of that and markets it in Latin America and in Africa, for instance, right? We might call it self-reliance, but some other country might call it piracy, and so the lines are blurred, and we do not know what to call it. But yes, in the health sector, for instance, I can say that some countries, and most notably India, can afford to speak about self-reliance. But many countries, let us say in Africa, Latin America, cannot afford to say that. And, we need to reach out to each other in order to, give them vaccines and all that. Now, we also realized for a time being that vaccines for ourselves only, and we stopped exporting those vaccines or sending them off to other countries. But after a point of time, we realized that it's not a very good gesture that India is saying, that we do. India said that, the priority is to vaccinate ourselves first. Well, all that is fine. And it's a good argument to say that we should vaccinate ourselves first before sending it off to other countries. But which other countries are we sending it off to? When we are talking about self-reliance and all that, please remember, and when we are trying to flex our muscles, as India is trying to do that we are a power now, literally, that we are a big power now, and an emerging power. So let us not forget that it is the same country that for a long time, assumed moral leadership of the global South for many, many decades. Why have we abdicated that role of moral leadership of the global South all of a sudden? Right? So there is something that is also going on beyond the whole idea of self-reliance. So whenever you're looking at the whole idea of self-reliance, don't get, try to, prick pins into this whole argument and then see, because you are a social scientist, you must see all aspects of this reality. Where is this discourse coming from? Why? Can I see through this? Is it valid? Why is it valid? Or why is it, whatever. So you have to, with an open and critical mind, you have to raise many questions about what's going around us, right? As I said. So, yeah, but it's good to see that, yes, we were Atmanirbhar or self-reliant on issues of vaccine production. But that was it, right? All the oxygen, and Odisha supplied a lot of oxygen to the rest of the country. But for quite some time, there was a little politics that was even doing in Delhi. So, a lot of oxygen didn't reach Delhi because a major political player or a party didn't want the oxygen to reach the patients in the hospitals in Delhi because they wanted to discredit the party in power. What kind of politics is that? It's a very sinister game that people have also played during this COVID. So in vaccine production, yes, right? But in terms of, ensuring people their livelihoods, but the COVID also opened up a different kind of a thing. Self-reliance of whom? Those who had the money, the middle class, they had some savings. And so the lockdown didn't affect them. But others were robbed of their livelihoods. There was no savings. Everything was blown up. And then you say, be self-reliant. It's the cruelest joke. It can be the very cruel joke to those who were deprived of their means of livelihood to say that we rely on self-reliance.
A damaged person cannot be self-reliant. Simple. So let's take the last question asked by Niranjan. So Niranjan, if you can directly ask, you can.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, my question is that you said in your talk that there is need of an agency to regulate flow of resource from global north to global south to global north. So my question is that as global financial institutions are dominated by rich countries, so how would you see the future and credibility of that global agencies for the promotion of global justice, sir?
Yeah, no, it's a very, very significant question, Niranjan, and a very good one that you have raised. And so what is the agency to regulate global resources? Often some people have spoken about, like Thomas Pogge, for instance, spoken about a global resources dividend. And some people, like Tobin has talked about a Tobin tax, that of all the financial transactions that go around the world, even if we set aside 1% of it, called the Tobin tax, 1% of all the financial transactions in the world, we set aside 1% of those in taxes, then we have enough to eradicate poverty in the world. Or what is called, if we set aside 1% of the, of the profits that are made out of trading in natural resources, for instance, we can set them aside and for use in terms of the global poverty eradication at the, so African countries have lots of natural resources, and yet they are the poorest. Jharkhand and Odisha, Odisha, of course, I can't say it is any longer the poorest because that will hurt the Odia pride these days. and the regional party in power also claims that Orissa is doing very well. So, but look at Jharkhand, look at even Chhattisgarh. They are very minerally rich countries, rich in natural resources. And yet, what we see in action is that there is some of these places which have huge natural resources are also have a resource curse, right? So, and this is ironic that the more natural resources you have, the more likely that you will, suffer the curse of poverty, right? So you see that in Africa. So what can you do to salvage this situation? Should you set aside a little bit of those global resources? And now one of the more important things that is being discussed in the world today, and that has a very huge geostrategic and geopolitical significance for all the big powers. Everybody wants to be there, let us say in this Arctic or in the Antarctic. And India is also flexing its muscles that we are a great power. We also want to be in the Arctic, and very recently, we were setting up a Center for Arctic and Polar Studies in Delhi University. And I'm one of the advisors there. So I know what's going on and how much of an interest does the government have in these things. Why? The reason is very simple. Now, we are not only trying to mine the resources in the Arctic and Antarctic, but also there is a huge volumes of ocean resources that lie at the bed of some of the biggest oceans now, and all the big powers are rushing there. The control over the big oceans is not just about a fight between China and the United States. It is about the minerals and about all the resources that lie buried on the seabed. All the big powers are jostling to get access to those. And on the surface, it might seem like, okay, people are jostling and jockeying and trying to gain spheres of influence even on these huge oceans. But actually, the motives are different. So, yeah, well, coming to your question, Niranjan. So, as global financial institutions are dominated by risk, how do you see the credibility and future of that global agency? That's an excellent question. So, where do we begin and where do we end? Now, when we're talking about global justice, at one point of time, people felt that we should be talking about a world state or something like that. But that is not likely to happen. States are not going to let loose their power. So the only thing that the global South countries can aim towards is to generate that momentum of raising some very relevant global norms that challenge the existing ones, in order that these norms then reinvent or redefine the existing institutions. So that is the aim. So we should generate more critique, more debates on some of these issues, so that some of these institutions are forced to take account of some of these issues. So in very soon, and then there are some international lawyers working on tax justice, for instance. Earlier, there was a political theory of tax justice, which had nothing to do with global implications. But now, lawyers across the world are now addressing some of these issues. So even as we speak, there are some people who are engaged with some of these issues at the global scale on trying to redefine some of these global norms on tax justice, for instance, so that we remedy the situation of, the inequities that are associated with illicit financial flows. Not illegal, by the way. Financial flows are not illegal. Look at the irony of this whole thing. They're not illegal. They're just illicit. Black money is illegal when it has crossed the borders because it has been robbed of the particular land, which should have been paid in taxes. So there is a tax evasion there. But in this kind of a situation, you don't have really a kind of a tax evasion, but you're kind of tax dodging. You're dodging the taxes in a very illicit manner. Because the government has invited you, given you a tax holiday. You're not supposed to pay a holiday, taxes. But then you're also inventing, and you're keeping on inventing ways and means out of which you are trying to siphon off the profits. So the World Tax Organization will be a reality in the near future, and so there is bound to be a certain kind of a momentum towards that, but more in terms of trying to correct the sort of maladies that some of the global south countries face. And so the more the discussion, the better equipped some of these institutions will be in terms of doing justice to the global south.
So thank you, sir. I think you have been speaking from for last 2 hours 15 minutes. So I will not take any more questions. So when you ask me that how much time I should speak, I told that there is no time limitation.
Right.
But you said that, but I have time limitation. I have other works to do. But since last 2 hours 15 minutes you are talking to us, you are answering our questions. That shows the kind of teacher you are. So a teacher
No,
cannot
but
avoid.
I also took a small little brief interlude.
That is something which is adjustable, no problem. So I think a teacher who is a teacher who cannot avoid the questions asked by the student. But at the same time, we should also uh, concern about the speaker. The speaker is a person. I mean, if a person is speaking for last 2 hours, I think somewhere we have to give him rest. So we are at the last part of this event. Now I request one of my MPhil student, Rina Rana, to provide vote of thanks to our speaker. Speaker, Rina.
Good evening, on behalf of
No, Rina, you are not audible at all. You are not at all audible.
Sir, now am I audible?
You are audible, but again you are not audible.
Audible.
Is there any network problem? If there is a network problem, let me do
Sir,
that.
am I?
Let me do. I think
Hello.
Your internet is yes. Let me do that, sir.
Am I
Rina, let
audible
me do
now?
that. You are audible, but your internet is not functioning properly. So please don't do
Hello?
that. Let me do that. Let me do that, Rina. Right. So this is the problem.
Sir.
This is the beauty that sir is there in the Delhi, and we can get knowledge from the Delhi directly. But it is again the disadvantage is that this network problem, and individual doesn't have any control over the network problem. So so thank you, sir. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your deliberation. Thank you for your handling of all these questions. And I understand, there are two ways of answering questions. One way is, giving a rudimentary answer, just giving a convincing reply so that the other person will get some kind of sense. And the other way is, engaging with those questions, thinking through these questions. And when you are thinking through the questions, many times you transgress to different sphere. Then again you are coming back, and finally you think that there is no particular perfect answer to any questions. There are always limitations. So I understand the kind of in that context I got a philosopher in you. In fact, philosopher is within us. Everyone has a kind of philosopher, but you need to work out that philosopher from your inside, right? So thank you, sir, for being a teacher, being a professor, since you professed many things, and being a philosopher to us. And I am also thankful to Dr. Patel for his introduction, for his observation, and most importantly, he said that he learned many things. when any retired person is saying that he is learning, that is a very good indication for academics. I have seen while I was in the JNU, I have seen very old man. They are in the Trimurti library and they have nothing to achieve in their life, but still then they are reading and they are learning. So learning is a lifelong process. So thank you, sir. We learned this good aspect from you, and I'm thankful to all the participants and those, especially those who asked questions. So thank you one and all, and I'm also thanking to myself, being the convener and being the technician, technical person.
We
So
thank you, Himanshu. I thank you, and for
yes,
taking
Thank
this
you.
huge initiative, and for inviting such so many scholars to this particular forum. May your forum grow and become more popular. May more students, serious students and scholars of political science join this forum and strengthen your hands. And at some point of time, I look forward to meeting some of you in person. And so thanks to you also, mainly to you, Himanshu, for doing all this.
yes, sir. So thank you. I'm doing it for academics, and we are all part of the academics. I think we should thank to each other. Yes, Patel sir, if you want to say something,
No,
you
it's
can.
okay. From my side also, I extremely thank you for your academic endeavor. You are doing a nice job, and I have all the good wishes for this forum to grow in future, and look forward to a brilliant future in this forum. So that's all.
I think that this initiative is a part of global justice. So it is not selfish interest, rather than it is a self interest, or I am working towards that general will. So I think this is a this initiative is a part of a global justice. That's how I think I can conclude. I can connect this today's talk with my initiative or attempt. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm stopping the recording, sir. Thank you. Namaste.